The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. Or so said Albert Einstein. I want to thank the member for Moreton for moving this motion, as I believe he's right. He's right to draw to attention the 75th anniversary of the 1949 Geneva Conventions. He's right in saying these conventions are just as important today as ever. Right to lament that while they are universally accepted, they are not being uniformly respected. Right to ask us to honour and advocate for the work of the Red Cross in assisting victims of armed conflict and for advancing international humanitarian law. And right to ask this House to determine Australia should remain a global leader in the promotion and implementation of the principles of the conventions. Today's anniversary reminds us of the importance of advocating for the humane treatment of any person during an armed conflict. It should also remind us that simply calling for this principle to be upheld is only as useful as the steps we're prepared to take when a nation breaches those principles. And for this reason, I would add one more important point to this motion, that being that this House should call on our government to take tangible and decisive action against those who ignore or breach the conventions. Many would be aware of the Geneva Conventions, which actually originated in the Napoleonic Wars in the mid-19th century. Then, Genevan businessman Henry Dunant witnessed the horrors of a gory battle in the Second War of Italian independence. The atrocities he saw impacted him so greatly that he proposed nations cooperate to create trained volunteer groups to treat those wounded in battle and offer humanitarian assistance. In 1863, a committee that included himself and an early iteration of the Red Cross brought 16 countries together in Geneva to discuss the terms of the wartime humanitarian agreement. The resulting treaty, the First Geneva Convention, was signed by just 12 of those countries. 160 years on then, the principles of the conventions have been revisited on multiple occasions, most frequently following a significant conflict, and on each occasion they've been expanded to extend human compassion and ensure accountability. But the existence of the conventions alone has never been enough to stop evil. It did not stop the Nazis in World War II, even though Germany was a signatory of the conventions in 1929. And in recent months, it has not stopped the atrocities we've seen and continue to see in multiple locations around the world. At this time of great uncertainty, I urge our government to move beyond words and towards action to ensure we play our part in protecting and enforcing the principles of the Geneva Conventions. There are more than 100 armed conflicts currently taking place around the world, and we should all do what we can to ensure the loss of innocent life is minimised and that the conventions are upheld. Because ultimately, compliance with these laws during armed conflict can not only alleviate the suffering of people, but can reduce the human, economic, social and environmental cost of war and help facilitate a return to a sustainable peace. These conventions provide a set of rules that seek to limit the effects on armed conflict and protect people who are not participating in hostilities, including by restricting the means and methods of warfare. Importantly, they recognise the rules should apply equally to all, regardless of race, faith, gender, location or nationality, and that no person or country is ever to be placed above the law. The conventions protect non-military places such as hospitals, schools and religious buildings, whilst also protecting those wounded or captured in battle and those who are not fighting, such as civilians, medical personnel, chaplains and humanitarian workers. Today, then, I'd also like to take this opportunity to honour Zomi Frankum, whose life was taken during an Israeli Defence Force drone strike in Gaza on the 1st of April this year. At the time, we were told this sort of thing happens in war, yet the rules of war contained in our international treaties explicitly exist to protect people like Zomi. In the aftermath of her death, Special Advisor Air Chief Marshal Mark Binskin found that chaos, confusion, fear and a breakdown in the chain of command and communications all contributed to Zomi's death. And we can recognise that those things can be true. But we must also reject the idea that the loss of her life was inevitable, for to do anything less is to turn our backs on the conventions and deny her family accountability. The longevity of instruments like the Geneva Convention is up to us, and the more they are tested, the more intentional we must be in protecting them. As a nation, Australia has a role to play in upholding the principles of international humanitarian law, and this includes continuing to support international bodies like the United Nations, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. We must continue to advocate for organisations like the Red Cross, for ultimately there should be no question of when we uphold international humanitarian, nor for whom. Our commitment to these principles in these organisations must
The
remain
member's
firm and
time
enduring.
has